All right, well, we're just going to get started. We definitely appreciate everyone's participation in today's strategy huddle for November. As just a reminder, this is a monthly strategy huddle. Towards the November, December, we're doing it the third week of the month, but future month it'll be the fourth Wednesday of the month. My name is Ryan, as I mentioned. I'm the account manager, product manager for MyStrategicPlan, and work with a lot of the customers in the planning system. The purpose of today's call, the strategy huddle, is to talk strategy, is to talk execution, and to address some real-world questions and provide some ideas and actionable solutions for you. We also know that you're doing great things in your strategic planning, and you're a strategic leader in your organization. So we're interested to hear from you as well, whether it's a question that you've pre-submitted or if there's something in the call that you have some feedback on that you'd like to provide others. We welcome that. What we'll do is just go over the ground rules here for a few minutes, and the presentation is going to last 45 to 60 minutes. We encourage your participation, and we also encourage you, if there's something that you have feedback on, to raise your hand. If you have any questions that you'd like answered, please use the chat box on the right-hand side and reply to the host or presenter. We'll do our best to address those questions. If there's something that you feel that you have input on the topic, also raise your hand. We can unmute you, and you're welcome to share that feedback. It's also important to note that this is not a rehearsed presentation. So this is live. We're taking questions on the front end, on the back end. All these topics have been pre-submitted by participants. And we did receive a lot of questions for this strategy huddle. Unfortunately, we're only able to address 3 of them, but we're going to give everybody a call back on the ones that we weren't able to address, and also address those on future strategy huddles. I'm just going to try to catch up here on the slides. Erica, if you could move those forward. So we just went over the ground rules there. And I'm going to just take a couple minutes to introduce today's strategy leaders, and that's Erica and Howard. Both are co-founders of M3 Planning, which is the parent company of MyStrategicPlan, and really the brains behind the intellectual property of the MyStrategicPlan system. Erica is the VP of Marketing. She's also the author of Strategic Planning for Dummies, and has several SWOT training videos both on the MyStrategicPlan website as well as YouTube if you look there for additional resources. And we will be adding more of those SWOT training videos here in the coming months. Howard is the CEO of M3 Planning, and he also has a PhD in marketing with an emphasis on research. A lot of our work on strategy and the research side of the business is driven by his direction. Both Eric and Howard are involved in the MyStrategicPlan system day to day, but they're also on the road half the month with consulting engagements and facilitating those strategic planning meetings, consulting, and that kind of work. In fact, Erica is actually in Bahrain as we speak right now, so we're hoping her voice quality holds up for us this afternoon. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Erica to get started.
Well, thanks, Brian, so much for that great introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone that's online with us today. And Howard, I want to say hello to you as well.
Well, hi. Hi from Palm Beach, Florida.
We're really excited to be calling in today, and as Ryan mentioned, that I'm running the session today from Bahrain, having worked with some strategy leaders over here in the Middle East for the past couple of days. Pretty exciting. So we hope to share some learnings from everyone as well. And due to that, my voice quality is just a little tough. It's got a little bit of a cold, so I'll do my best to make sure that I'm intelligible and not too muted. So at any rate, as Ryan mentioned, we're really excited to be back here again this month talking about what's on your mind related to strategy. And again, our intent is to cover questions that are important to you. So looking at the agenda today, and we'll just jump right on in. We love to just share a strategy stat of the month, as we call it. So we'll just cover one of those items. We had some feedback about making sure that everyone understands the strategy. And so we'll chat about that. We'll also talk about how to best use your SWOT. We got a lot of questions about so we do a SWOT, so how do we use it to set strategy? So we'll provide a real live case study on how you might consider using your SWOT as you're developing your plan this year. And then we'll look at establishing your competitive position, and the purpose related to that is just a as commoditization is pushing down and driving differentiation to almost a bland state, how do we actually increase our differentiation and establish a competitive position in an increasingly competitive environment? So we'll look at that as well. As Ryan mentioned, please, as we're going through, raise your hand, pop some questions into the chat box. This is live. We want to hear what's on your mind and want you to share if you have ideas on how it's working in your organization. So let's jump right on in. This is our strategy stat of the month. This is one of our most favorite statistics that we like to show. You might find this useful if you're trying to encourage some strategic planning activities within your organization and needing to convince upper management. You can see here there's a list of what are called management tools. This is a management tools study done by Bain & Company. They do it every year and have done so, I think, for about the past 10 years. At any rate, you can see that the second most used management tool is strategic planning and has been up in the top the whole time that they've been doing this study. Probably more important than it being widely used is the satisfaction that the respondents say they're gaining or realizing from the use of strategic planning as a management tool in their organization. And you can see it ranks the most highly satisfied management tool of all the tools that are listed on here. So just love to share this statistic. You can see also some of the other tools that are on there in case there's some things that you're thinking about implementing in your organization, kind of where they rank against the respondents who responded to this study. I think there were several thousand worldwide. If you want more information, the Bain website has tons of data, longitudinal data, as well as additional data from this year. So with that, let's jump into the first question, which someone submitted to us, which is, how do I articulate my strategy? I need to feel more comfortable talking about our strategy so I can get buy-in. Do I need a quote-unquote elevator pitch? And so we're calling that the question of everyone understanding the strategy. And I think this is so great because part of our jobs as leaders of the strategic planning process, regardless of your actual functional role in the organization, is to make sure that everyone can articulate what the strategy is. And oftentimes we just rest that on mission and vision. And what we'd like to do with this particular example is just give you kind of maybe a more robust way of looking at how you talk about strategy. So this is a quick hit, broken down into three specific areas. And I'd like to just point out that this is certainly not a suggestion of rewriting your mission or your vision statement, or if this needs to be embedded in your strategic plan. It's merely pulling out some key pieces of your strategic plan so everybody can understand sort of what the vision is, the objective, where we're headed, the scope of the business, which also oftentimes finds itself in the mission, and the advantage that we're using to reach that objective. And it's just kind of a nice way to think about, can we say all of this together in a quick way, in an effective way, really. So can you say what your strategy is? Three components. The first is your vision. Maybe we're not re-articulating the vision specifically, but are we able to clearly explain where we're going? Which objective of all of the different places in the future that we can find ourselves is most likely to maximize shareholder value over the next several years? Like to just put the caveat there. We know that there are folks on the call today that are not necessarily interested in maximizing shareholder value, but most everyone is interested in maximizing some value, whether it's citizen value or perhaps it's social impact value or shareholder value if you're a private entity. So kind of replace the word that works for you. The point here, of course, is not to just have a generic statement about maximizing shareholder value, but really clearly where are we going. And we often have that embedded in our vision statement, so perhaps it's just a way of re-articulating the vision statement. So which objective is most likely to maximize shareholder value over the next several years? So that's the first component. The next component, I think, is great, which really clarifies and should talk about the boundaries by which we will not venture. So where will we not go? Or turning it around to the positive, what's the scope of our business? What will we encompass? And looking at it in three dimensions: customer or offering, so it could be customer or product/service, geographic location, and vertical integration. So let's just touch on a couple of these for just a moment. Customer, of course, who will we serve? What markets will we serve? Or what products or services will we continue to offer or bring on, if you will, over the next several years, again, the planning period. Geographic location is pretty clear. And then vertical integration, just to make sure we're all using the words the same, is of course, buying companies up and down your value chain. So whether it's on your distribution side and or is it on the production side. And then the next item is the advantage. So what advantage are we actually going to use in order to reach our objectives? So that competitive edge and value proposition. And I know this is something that Howard's really passionate about. So Howard, will you please add your perspective to these three items?
Thanks, Erica. These three items didn't necessarily, they're very practical and they make good sense, but they came out of a Harvard Business Review article that the title is "Can You Say What Your Strategy Is?" and it's an April of 2008 article that takes everything in a lot deeper manner. And if people need more on that site, they can send us an email. But a couple of the points that I really, both advantage and scope that really comes to my mind is that, as Porter would say, or as anybody else would say, when you really stop and think about strategy is all about making decisions. And it's like Erica said, and the scope, it's what's in and what's out. And when we make this decision about what our boundaries is, it helps those folks we're working with, our managers and so forth, to know and focus and be able to say, this is what we're about. And the key part of strategy has to do with the advantage. And as we're going to roll into the third question there about how to, with the commoditization, in this time of this changing environment, if we really don't fine-tune and hone our competitive advantage, we get lost. So the more we can take that information and spread it out through the company so they understand what we're really leverages in the marketplace, it's absolutely critical. So sometimes you really need to pull people aside and really work through what are these absolute differentiation we bring to the marketplace. So these are really three simple aspects: vision, scope, and advantage. But if the leadership team can crystallize this and then put the information forward, it helps the management team and it helps even the frontline folks understand what the company is really trying to do. So I really can't overemphasize these three simple points, but to be fine-tuned and be understood by everybody is absolutely critical.
Howard, would you mind explaining the Edward Jones example as long as you're in the flow?
Oh, okay. So does that slide up?
Yep.
So on the left side of that slide is a nice visual on how all this really can come together and trying to find that position. And we're going to actually talk a little bit about this in the third spot, but find that sweet spot, find that point where we can provide, your company can provide, based upon its capabilities, customers' needs, and ones that we're providing and not what our competitors are. So it helps us to stand out a little bit more. So that's a really kind of a neat graphic. In that article that I had mentioned, that Harvard Business Review article, the example that they used was the Edward Jones strategy. So as you can see, it's fairly crystal clear. If anybody has done work with Edward Jones, or it does have an account there, you can see that this is what they do. They're all about wanting to grow individual advisors in the next couple of years, and they want to do stuff face-to-face. And this is crystal clear. So this division is to grow to 17,000 by 2012. Their competitive advantage is the face-to-face situation, and then the marketplace they're playing in is in the conservative individual investors who want to take charge of what they are, their own financial future, through a network of one-on-one offices. So this says what their strategy is It does say the vision, the scope of your plan, and it shows our advantage. So it's a really crystal clear example of how this can be so powerful. When everybody inside of Edward Jones knows this is where we're headed and this is what we're going to do, this is what we're going to do, super. So, again, if anybody wants that article, we can forward it on to them. Thanks for letting me share that. That's my little passion, as you can tell.
Yes, that's right. So that's great. And so, anyways, just kind of a new way to think about how maybe we take if we've already done, gone through the mission, vision, values exercise, how we can kind of come back around and be really clear about articulating our strategy and using that throughout the organization. So, with that, we'll move on to the next question. But I'd just like to say, please don't forget, if you have some feedback or you'd like to add your thoughts or questions or new ideas, whatever's working for you as we're moving through this, please raise your hand no matter where we're at, or pop a question in the chat box, and we'll just we'll take it as it comes, even if we want to go backwards and talk about an item that we've moved off of. So with that, let's look at the next question, which is using your SWOT. And we've got several questions on this. This is also something that comes up a lot in the work that we do. Every year we do a SWOT, but we never actually use it to develop strategy. So how might we actually use our SWOT? And just like to mention that certainly there are as many ways to use your SWOT as there are to put a strategic plan together. So by no means am I going to share something that is the way to do it. It's just perhaps a new way to do it. Or a slight variation of what you might already be doing. So let's just share a real-world case study of using a SWOT to develop strategy. So in this particular example, it was some work we did for a state college, working with them to identify their strategic position. So this particular organization has a fairly robust environmental scan and sort of data gathering process in place. So all of these offices, and you can see listed here all the departments, actually through the course of the year were putting together their strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats as they saw them in industry publications or conferences or whatever the case may be, and they would submit them at a given time after they'd collected them all to the strategy office. The great part about it was an ongoing environmental scan and data gathering process. The problem with it was the document that we received was maybe 200 pages or something like that of Excel pages. It was just really, really large. And so one thing that they had a big problem with was actually going from step 1 to step 2, in this case, from taking that data and actually synthesizing it to use it effectively in a strategic planning offsite. So that's another challenge, of course. That was just something that people need to sit down and sift through and pull out the important stuff. That said, what we did was, and we all would do in our work, of course, is take all that data and synthesize the key pieces down into a usable SWOT, whereby in this case, each item of the SWOT, each section of the SWOT probably had a page, so it was like a 4-page document. So then what? Well, we said, okay, well, even with a 4-page document, there's probably, I don't know, maybe, and it is a state college, so there was a lot of data in it. There's maybe 30 or 40 strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, and they're not all relevant, of course. And so the first thing we did in the process was to ask the question, please identify the items that you think will have the highest impact on the organization over the next X number of years. In this case, it was 5 years. So when we did this in a facilitated session, something that you can run in your organization, let's make some sense of all this information. So which of the items actually does your breakout group think will have the highest impact on the organization over the next, in this case, 5 years? So we culled it down to start with. So sort of visually looking at that here, we're seeing those items that are in bold. The next step that we did is we said, okay, well, let's actually align the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats under the top-level strategic statement. In this case, they're calling them strategies. At the top-level strategic buckets or statements in which those strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats are most related. So what you can see on this slide here is just kind of a cursory example of what that might look like. Of course, not using specifics. A couple pieces I'd like to pull out of this, though, is, first of all, moving into this, we had the 6 key long-term strategic objectives, long-term strategic goals, in this case, long-term strategies identified already. So that was a precursor to actually making this particular process work. Then the next step, once you have that, of course, is to say, let's look at our big list of strengths and say, well, does this strength apply to this? Does this strength apply to this? So, for example, strategy 1 might be increasing student enrollment. So we asked the group that was provided the strengths list to identify the items in there that would most impact or most influence, perhaps, goal setting in that area. Our own sticky notes, of course, so please stick the note on the poster related to enrollment. So we took those high priority items and we essentially sorted them under the 6 strategies in this case. And then based on that, we asked the groups to come back around. Of course, this is something you could do yourself. Come back around and actually establish the goals and actions with now the information that was related to moving forward, and let's just say student enrollment. So you had a set of strengths, set of weaknesses, opportunities, and threats related to moving forward student enrollment. And maybe you didn't have all 4 items, maybe you had a couple of them, but really powerful work and certainly made the SWOT useful and actually come to life. And Howard and I worked on this together. Howard, any other points that you'd like to add to how this works?
Thanks, Erica. In their case, it was really powerful because I just want to go back to the beginning because one thing we found with this particular organization is that we had to go back and really talk through what a SWOT was because, again, like strategic planning, everybody's heard the word SWOT, so they're supposed to know what to do with it. And with the case we just find is just time and time again, folks don't know what to do with it. So this little process that Erica explained was just phenomenal. So when people actually got involved in seeing the SWOs and Ts line up under these long-term strategic objectives or strategies in their case, that was really powerful. I was really involved in taking, as Erica was talking about, we had a huge list to start out with. When you get information from the different departments, we really need to ask them to explain if you get a strength, okay, so it came out of maybe some newspaper article or whatever else, but to identify, so what? Okay, so what for your organization? We got this strength that says that the number of students, college-age students are growing in this particular state. Well, that's a wonderful opportunity, but so what? What are we supposed to do with this? So actually to have an explanation of what to do with it was really important in that case. So it does help then identify how these strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats can be used with these top-level strategic objectives. So that's my 2 cents on that, Erica. Do you remember any other little innuendos and how that worked? Because it was so powerful.
No, but I just have to say we've done that a couple other times with some other organizations, and it's something that I shared with the strategy leaders over here in Bahrain as well, and it really kind of got a lot of people excited. And hopefully I've explained the process well enough, and actually I'll just throw up some reactions just so we're clear on how you might implement it in your organization or with clients that you're working with. I think it's important to note certainly this doesn't work all the time. It's definitely maybe slightly different than you might be doing. It might be similar. There's, of course, many other ways to go about it as I started off the discussion. And the traditional one, of course, is to match up the SWs, O's, and T's, or maybe to do a TOES, or all those different things. And I think some of those work really well in a facilitated session. I think some of them don't. We are not always doing this in a facilitated session, so we all know we got to pull out the right process at the right time. But this one has been really great because people have felt like, first of all, they used the SWOT, and second of all, it made sense, and it was much better when we moved into goal setting because we were informing our goal setting. So those are kind of just my takeaways, and again, as mentioned, sort of done it a couple other times, and people really resonated with it. So just some summary actions on how might you do this, so we're really clear about what we did. We first, of course, created a workable SWOT. That's not on the slide, but that sort of leads into this, of course. And then because the particular SWOT we were working with, we needed to identify the high priority items. You may or may not need to do that. We then aligned them, or we asked the team to align them under the top-level strategy statement. Questions that I've been asked is, well, what happens when it goes in two places? Well, put it in two places, of course. The prerequisite to this working, as I had mentioned, is you need to have those buckets, those top-level statements. If you don't, perhaps they need to be created. Or they would need to, you could create them without having a clear, maybe a long-term strategic goal or strategic objective statement. And then, of course, based on your aligning them or sorting them, if you will, the next step would be to go into your goal or objective setting for the next level down. What are we going to do next year or the next 2 years? And develop your goals and actions based on the information that is related to that item. And of course, the point we have to drive towards is asking people to be fairly rigorous about looking at each of the items that are aligned with, let's just say, increasing student enrollment, not to just look at them from a surface perspective and say, oh, well, great. So that's something I think from a processing needs to happen. And then I just added the item on here to use last year's SWOT. And Howard, I'm going to pass this back over to you because I'm just going to have a little bit of a cough. Go right ahead.
Instead of starting from scratch, for sure, as the note is, that what we see time and time again is the SWOT is really shouldn't just be a snapshot. The SWOT is more or less kind of explained like a moving picture. So it's going on all the time, and if we can use last year's and add to it and say, you know, what did we accomplish from it and what's being carried forward here, it's a solid basis because we're not just doing this in a vacuum. So do you remember, Erica, what the SWOT might have looked like in the previous situation from this particular school?
No, I don't believe so.
Okay. I didn't either. I couldn't remember off the top of my head, but it does help as a foundation to move forward. So developing a solid SWOT. Go on.
Yeah, I was just going to say we'd love to hear from other folks on how you're using, some great ideas you might have on using your SWOT and things that you felt have worked as well, but trying to kind of, get a library going for everyone about what might be working and using this important strategy tool to develop an effective strategy. So we'd love to hear from folks. So if you'd like to share, please raise your hand or pop something in the chat box. Please. So Howard, unless you have any other closing comments on that one, we'll move to the next question.
I'm good.
Okay. And as Ryan mentioned, since this isn't rehearsed, I apologize. I'm losing my voice, so if I have to go out for a moment, I do apologize with that. So looking at the next question, we sort of started this off with the agenda mentioning that people ask a lot, and you're probably hearing a lot about this in your organizations as well as with your clients, is really how do we continue to find a competitive position when everything seems to be being commoditized. And I just think a lot of people are struggling with this. Industries that we think wouldn't be commoditized are being commoditized. And so how do we find our strategic position? And I'd just like to caveat this with what we're going to talk about right now is not a silver bullet to this particular question. It is one thought and one tool that you might use to help guide the thinking. And certainly it's not the end of everything. It's just one thing we might do. And then, and part of the reason for the strategy huddle is to provide really practical, useful things that we can all just kind of put in place right away if we need to. So maybe this is a topic we'll continue to build on because I think there's a lot more that we probably could explore, we should explore, as it relates to finding your strategic position in a world that's continuing to be commoditized. So something that this is the tool we'd like to pull out for today, sort of from the world of marketing, but we suggest to not leave it just in the world of marketing, and that would be to actually develop a positioning map. So we're really big fans, of course, and I'm sure a lot of folks are as well, about being able to see your strategy. So a positioning map is a really great way to see the strategy. So this particular example that's on the screen right now is probably not the best example of seeing your strategy. We'll show one on the next slide in a moment. But just to orient everyone to a positioning map, what we're looking at here is two axes, two variables, and you can use any two variables you want, which is what I think can make putting a positioning map together a bit challenging. But part of the purpose, of course, is to just play with it, see what it tells you. Perhaps you put two variables together that don't tell you anything, and so we try again. The two variables in this particular example happen to be price, which is the y-axis, and fuel, and it should say fuel usage. That makes a bit more sense, really, or fuel economizing. But let's just say fuel usage for now, and that's on the x-axis. And of course, then you label the ends of each axis with high or low. So we have high price, low price, high fuel economy, low fuel economy. So what we're looking to try to do is to plot our competitors on this axis. Now, certainly this is subjective. The purpose of the thing, though, however, you would need to go into this is to gather your competitive data. And in order to get, wanting to gather your competitive data, having a purpose to do so, it's helpful to identify those variables, in this case, pricing and economy, in order to plot the information. So, looking at this right now, you can kind of see that we've got over in the upper left-hand corner Ferrari and Range Rover, BMW and Saab over in the right-hand corner, Hyundai and Kia in the lower corner. Now, if we were to actually see a positioning map with all of the automakers on here, although probably less than before, but all of the automakers on here, you would see a lot more interesting of a strategy story. But let's look at the next slide, because I think this starts to tell us about competitive positioning. Moving, let's see here.
Erica?
Oh. Yep.
Could I just add a little point to the basic positioning map?
Yeah, go right ahead.
The premise for this is that we're trying to stay out of the commoditization game, and as you mentioned, more and more of the folks that we're talking to are really feeling like they're being pushed that way with the global economy. In China, having so many goods out in our market, so forth, that are low price. What we really need to be going back, just like we talked about, is you mentioned initially, with how can we say our strategy is understanding our competitive advantage. So understanding our competitive advantage applies to this, because what we're doing is the two axes in this case, and we can do different ones, are really the attributes on which our competitors make decisions. So if in this particular one we're looking at is we feel that the position marketplace we're trying to focus on, our customers make a decision based upon price and fuel economy, that's what we want to look at. We need to look at what drives our value proposition and helping our customers make their decision, and that's what we use as our axis. So the attributes of our customers' decision-making process is how we develop that map. So we've got another.
Yeah.
Go on. We've got another example that you.
No, that's great. It is, and unfortunately, I think the example that I have up on the screen doesn't have those attributes, but I think that's certainly sort of the next level of plotting for a positioning map. The one that's up on the screen right now is it's actually our own positioning map, only because oftentimes we don't want to share client positioning maps or private positioning maps, and because they're pretty confidential, of course. But we thought, well, we'd share ours because it's something that we did, and it actually starts to explain how we should be thinking about the competitive environment, as Howard was chatting about, and where we find our competitive advantage. And certainly this is just, as mentioned, just one tool, but you can see on the x-axis we have price, and on the y-axis we have size, and what we're talking about here is size of business, and we're speaking in this case of size of customer that we serve. So this is looking actually at MyStrategicPlan and how MyStrategicPlan is positioned against a lot of other strategic planning software applications, and who's serving the small sub 50, and those are number of employees, so size of business. So sub 50 employee size to the 300 or 50 to 300 enterprise, and then Fortune 500. So when we looked at this and we did pretty extensive work just to see what a lot of the other competitors are doing. It was a great exercise. You can see, of course, the clustering in the upper right-hand corner. It's really, really frothy market up there. A lot of people serving that larger organizations, higher prices. We pretty much knew that, but it was interesting to see who really sat up there. And then over in the bottom left-hand corner, some of the smaller applications and certainly a lower price range. And so we sort of saw that there was really big open space. Really, you can sort of see the potential if you can get there of where there's space and where you can differentiate in the market. And so we then said, well, where do we want to be? And we moved to a blue spot there, and we're trying to get there. So tells you a little bit about our internal strategy, but it also is the point of this, of course, is to say this is a really great way to say, well, where can we find space in the market? Now, granted, these particular two axes told a story. They told more of a story than the car example that we looked at. Not as strong of a story about the competitive advantage that Howard was just mentioning, and that would be an interesting thing to kind of plot with all of these competitors here. But certainly, maybe a space we don't want to play, not that we were planning on going there anyways, but anybody, frankly, pretty busy up there. So shows some potential space in the market, and really, really powerful, again, helping us set strategy from where we currently were at the time to where we want it to be in the future, and really syncing it up with practical information and really being sort of real with what the competitive environment looks like. Howard, want to add anything on how that came together?
Well, I'd just like to embellish a little bit there, unpack a little bit what you were talking about. When we began this third point, the topic is about trying to get out of the commoditization game. As you can imagine, the more you try to play in the pricing space, the more you end up in commoditization, because trying to differentiate yourself on price is a poor process, because not too many Walmarts are out there that have the kind of low-cost leadership being able to do that. So we wanted to move out of the pricing position. We didn't want to be considered just any little thing out there for $39.95. And so, as Erica was mentioning, we had to look at, okay, where are we now down below in this pricing, and where do we want to go? So then, using our competitive advantages, how do we build a strategy to move ourselves away from pricing to develop, in our case, our online software tool to be able to support enterprises. Initially, years ago, it was just a basic little tool that didn't have implementation or you couldn't cascade goals and so forth. So that kind of forced us to stay in the lower end and so forth, and being stuck with the potential of being commoditized. So we made a conscious effort a couple of years ago, to move from that bottom quadrant away from being considered just something that you can do planning for cheap, up to a tool that was substantially more robust and had a different price point. So this little map, even though as Erica had originally alluded to, stated, it's just based on two axes. But when you sit down with a team and you start digging into all the basis for what comes together and explaining those positions, that it does help you give a rather interesting perspective all the way around, and then can help you, to develop the strategy, albeit maybe take something a number of years to get there, in which it did take us, but that it's really an excellent tool, even though it's fairly simple to drive strategy and stay out of the commoditization game.
That's great, and just sort of really emphasizing the results that we've realized over the several years, and that's, of course, what everyone's trying to do for their businesses. Right.
Yeah. Since I'm not privy to any other thoughts that might be raised by folks that are attending the huddle, I'd sure like to hear from somebody that has used the positioning map because it's, in one respect, it's a textbook tool, but in another respect, when you really sit down and use it and understand it, it's really robust and does give folks a pretty comprehensive understanding where they might find themselves in the marketplace.
So maybe we'll give folks a couple minutes to either raise their hand or add comments to the chat box, and I'll kind of wrap up maybe with some summary actions on how you might do this for your organization if you haven't. So certainly if you have something to add right now, we'd love to hear. So I'll just quickly summarize it and see if anybody wants to chime in. And just kind of wrapping up this positioning map, what is pretty exciting for us is to say, where it says MSG Future is kind of where we are right now, and it was because of the intentional strategy put behind it, which this map helps us tell the story. And that's what, tell the, not the strategy story, but tell the story of where we needed to go and actually set the strategy. So now instead of it saying future right there, it would say current, and I think that's really cool. So, quick summary actions. How do we do this? Of course, the first thing to do is identify your top competitors, and you may have lots, and may only have a handful depending upon the industry. Need to establish the two variable axes, that should be plural, such as price, company size, or at least a combination that you might be thinking about. Head out and research the key variables. Of course, we know that, I'm just saying, well, go research your competitors feels a little bit like corporate espionage sometimes, and so being a bit delicate and ethical about gathering competitive data is part of what has to be added into this particular conversation. Certainly the point would be there's a lot of information you can find on company websites. We all know that, and that's really how we conducted this as well. So at any rate, people always ask us, well, so it's not so easy to get information about our competitors. Well, it is easy to get information that's publicly available, so use publicly available information, at least to start with. And then, of course, plot yourself and your competitors on the map. And then, the item on there, too, which you could add on there is, where would you like to move into the future? If the map tells you a story, do you want to stay where you are? Do you see yourself moving? What does that look like? So I'm not seeing any hands raised. I'm not seeing any questions in the question box. So I'll keep on moving along. That summarizes the three key questions that we've been asked to cover by you all today. There's a question that was submitted as we were moving through, and I'll just take it as it reads. And specifically it says, and Howard, you and I can kind of key off each other on this, strategic planning assumes, this is the question, or the statement I should say, strategic planning assumes that we know where we are going and where we want to be in 3 to 5 years, and not to mention having control over those events. Seems like a basic question, but at the same time, this is a battle that happens in many organizations in trying to get buy-in from the team over where we are trying to head. I certainly think that is true, and we can have a lot of conversation about do we need to be really clear about that place we need to be in 3 to 5 years. Let's just pick 3 years because it's a little bit easier, 5 more strategic, arguably. Working with some folks right now where, hammering down or being really clear about what that future state looks like has been really hard, and it has been, as our participant asked, it's been really hard to get buy-in from the team. I really feel like part of the challenge with this sometimes is feeling like we can't identify that place in the future because we don't have enough information or the right information to feel confident about saying, yeah, that's the mountain we want to climb, that's the hill we want to take, we want to be there because we know we can be there and we know that that's the place we should be, let's say. And that really comes back to that strategic positioning, and that's why we share the positioning map, by the way. But it feels to me like a lot of times when organizations can't be clear about their vision or we can't get consensus around where that place in the future should be, it's because there's a feeling like there's not enough information about what's going on in the environment, or the environment's so volatile that maybe we can't get rid of the variability in order to kind of hone in on where we should be. And I think we would all agree, and Howard, I'd love to hear your feedback on this. I have a really strong feeling that we would all agree with the fact that if we can be at least attempts to be clear enough about where we want to be in 3 years, which is really not that far away, we will be much better off by putting a stake in the ground and stating what it is than just not saying what it is because we're too scared to pick that place. And just really feel strongly that we need to pick that place. But we're scared to execute the wrong strategy, so I feel that way too. But anyways, that's kind of where I fall right now. Pick a place and go there. How do you feel about it, Howard?
Well, I think we go back to, it's interesting as you're talking about the 3 points we brought up today, but the questions that folks sent in, but it goes back to the first slide. Is strategy is all about making a decision, and so as you're saying, we have worked with folks that have a little bit difficult time trying to make a decision, but nobody has a crystal ball, and so we all need to go out and get as much information as we can. Just as a side note, there's an organization called Realworld. You can buy industry research, and they project out 5 years, and it costs anywhere from $750 to $1,000, depending upon what you're buying or getting a subscription. It's really pretty thorough stuff. So that does help you drive that stake, as Erica was saying, to make that decision to go forward. And if you don't drive the stake, if we hadn't driven the stake back on our positioning map when we were down in the bottom left-hand corner to drive to go to the upper one, we'd never be there. Drive the stake, make the decision, and go forward, and that's the way we make things happen. The world is continually changing. It's going to change quicker. It's so far out of our control that it's difficult, but we need to be doing that SWOT all the time, collecting information, drive that stake, and move ourselves forward. And there's a lot of good data out there. So drafting that statement up, it's strategy is all about making a decision and about what's in and what's out, and that way we can get everybody on the team and go forward. That's my.
So I put up the concluding slide, but I kind of like to wrap up, and Howard, you did a nice job of kind of bringing it all back together and kind of just talking about if we need to feel more confident about making a decision about what's in and what's out, evaluating our strategic position and potentially using a positioning map to help us do that, informing ourselves with the data that's out there, and as Howard mentioned, lots of data sources. This is just really a great one. I think we have access to data. We need to feel confident that we can go get it and that it's worth getting. That's sort of the thing as well. And then using that information in a real way to drive that into our strategy and our goal-setting process. And so we just shared one idea of really specifically using it in your pulling out your SWOT and using it in your strategy development process and goal-setting. And then sort of working backwards through the question, can you say what your strategy is, that idea of team buy-in and engagement through the organization, and really making sure that people are clear about the vision, the scope, and the advantage that we are using as organizations or our organization to move us forward. So kind of a really kind of important summary note I'd like to just share. It feels to me like that very first, I think it's Michael Porter article, What is Strategy? It's Porter, correct, Howard?
Yep.
Yeah, Porter's article on what is strategy. I've seen a lot of people pulling that out today, and it's been kind of fun to just be in a meeting and say, oh, somebody has, what is strategy? It's quite an old article, really, but the tenets of it are holding true, and maybe just recommend to everybody to hop on to HBR if you don't have that in your library and go grab what is strategy, because it feels like we're kind of re-examining some of those ideas. So at any rate, any closing comments, Howard?
What is strategy is an excellent article, and and I think what we're starting to see, there is nothing new under the sun, and to move forward in a volatile environment, it's all about basics. It's all about understanding the solid tools that have worked time and time and time again, and that can carry us forward in a volatile marketplace. And that's what we talked about, 3 time-tested little tools to help an organization grab a hold of that steering wheel and to move themselves forward in this bumpy world that we have due to our economic problems.
That's right.
So there's a lot of good information available, and if folks have a question about where those came from, the sites that Eric and I brought up today, just send in a little email. We'll help you with that. Erica?
Great. So with that, I think we're going to wrap it up, and we just really appreciate everyone's time as always. We have the next huddle listed on here. Ryan mentioned that it's December 16th at 9 o'clock. We'd love to hear from everyone. We'd love to hear if this is writing value to you. We'd love to hear from you about your ideas, too. If you'd like to share something in a more detailed way and actually be a co-presenter, we'd love to hear that as well. So just shoot us an email. You have our contact information on the slide right there. Something you would like us to explore or bring forward, we'd be happy to do that as well. We will be sending out the link to this recording by the end of the week. We know last time was a bit delayed, but this time it will come out quite a bit more quickly. We appreciate your feedback, and we look forward to working with everybody continued into the future. And happy Thanksgiving next week, and happy taking a couple days off to spend with your family. So with that, thanks for your time. Have a great rest of the week. Take care.
Thank you so much.